The Basementee. Member of 2005 and a young couple, Sarah and Mike, had just moved into an old Victorian house in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio. The house was charming, with creaky floorboards and a large, overgrown garden. But as they settled in, Sarah began to feel an unsettling presence in the house, particularly around the basement. "Do you think we should check it out?" Mike asked one evening, as they sat on the couch, the flickering light of the TV casting shadows across the room. Sarah shivered at the thought. "I don't know. I just have a bad feeling about it." But curiosity got the better of them. They decided to venture down into the basement, armed with a flashlight and a sense of bravado. As they descended the narrow stairs, the air grew colder, and the smell of damp earth filled their nostrils. The beam of the flashlight danced across the walls, revealing old tools and boxes covered in dust. "What is this place?" Mike whispered, his voice barely above a murmur. "It looks like it hasn't been touched in years." As they explored, Sarah noticed a door at the far end of the basement, slightly ajar. A sense of dread washed over her. "Maybe we should leave," she urged, but Mike, driven by curiosity, pushed the door open. The room beyond was small and windowless, and as the light spilled in, they were hit by a wave of despair. The walls were plastered with photographs, hundreds of them, of people throughout the years, their faces twisted in terror. Some were black and white, while others were faded color prints. "Who would do this?" Sarah gasped, her heart racing, but before Mike could respond, they heard a low, guttural sound coming from the shadows. Panic surged through them as they stepped back, but the door swung shut behind them, trapping them inside. "Let me out!" Sarah screamed, pounding on the door. The sound of scratching filled the air, and they could feel something moving in the darkness. Mike pressed his ear to the door, listening intently. "I think it's coming from the other side," he said, his voice trembling. "We need to find a way out." Frantically, they searched for another exit, but the room was sealed tight. The scratching grew louder, now accompanied by a faint whispering. "Help me! Help me!" It was a voice, weak and pleading. "Who's there?" Sarah cried, terror gripping her heart. "What do you want?" But there was no answer, only the sound of the scratching growing closer. Mike turned to Sarah, his eyes wide with fear. "We need to break down the door." With all their strength, they charged at the door, but it wouldn't budge. As the whispers turned into desperate cries, they felt a cold breeze sweep through the room, chilling them to the bone. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and they stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath. But as they turned back to the basement, the door slammed shut, and the whispering stopped. They never spoke of that night again, but the photographs haunted their dreams. Years later, they learned the house's dark history. A family had vanished without a trace, and the basement had been sealed for decades. The whispers, they discovered, belonged to those who had been trapped, their souls forever lingering in the shadows of the basement, waiting for someone to help them escape. The Neighbor. In a small suburban neighborhood in 1998, a girl named Lisa lived next to a man named Mr. Thompson. He was an elderly recluse, rarely seen outside his home. The neighborhood children whispered rumors about him, claiming he was a warlock or a witch, but Lisa found him fascinating. One evening, Lisa was playing in her yard when she noticed Mr. Thompson standing by his window, watching her with an unsettling intensity. She waved, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned away, disappearing into the shadows of his house. Curiosity got the better of her, and one day she decided to explore his yard. It was overgrown and wild, filled with strange statues and odd trinkets that sent shivers down her spine. As she ventured deeper, she stumbled upon a small shed in the back. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit space filled with jars, each containing what looked like preserved animals. There were mummified birds, snakes coiled in glass, and even a small, deformed creature that resembled a human. Lisa felt a wave of nausea wash over her as she backed away, but then she heard a voice behind her. "You shouldn't be here." She turned to see Mr. Thompson standing at the entrance, his eyes dark and penetrating. Fear gripped her heart as she stammered, I was just exploring." "Exploring?" "This is private property," he snapped, stepping closer. "You need to leave." Terrified, Lisa bolted from the shed and ran home, her heart pounding in her chest. That night, she couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Thompson was watching her, lurking in the shadows of his house. Days turned into weeks, and Lisa avoided him at all costs. But one evening, she heard a commotion outside. Peering through her window, she saw police cars surrounding Mr. Thompson's home. Her heart raced as she watched the officers carry out boxes and bags, their faces grim. The next day, she overheard her parents talking about what happened. "They found body parts in his shed," her mother said, her voice trembling. He had been killing animals for years, but it was much worse than anyone realized. Lisa felt sick to her stomach. The rumors were true. Mr. Thompson was not just a recluse, he was a monster. The police arrested him, but the fear lingered in the neighborhood long after he was taken away. Months later, Lisa learned that Mr. Thompson had been charged with multiple counts of animal cruelty, but also something more sinister. He had been linked to a series of missing children in nearby towns. The whispers that had once fascinated her now filled her with dread. To this day, the house remains abandoned, and the neighborhood children still dare each other to approach it. But Lisa knows the truth. The shadows that once danced in Mr. Thompson's yard still linger, waiting for the next curious soul to venture too close. The apartment. In 2010, a young woman named Claire moved into a quaint apartment in a historic building in New Orleans. The charm of the old architecture captivated her, and the low rent made it an irresistible deal. But soon after she settled in, strange occurrences began to unfold. At first it was harmless. Objects would go missing, only to reappear in odd places. But then, Claire started to hear whispers in the night. They were soft at first, like the rustling of leaves, but slowly grew louder until she could make out words, her name spoken in a low, haunting tone. "Claire, come play with us." One evening as she lay in bed, the whispers grew louder and more insistent. Terrified, she decided to confront whatever was haunting her. Armed with a flashlight, she crept through the dimly lit hallways of the apartment, the air thick with unease. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. But there was no answer, only the sound of her heartbeat pounding in her ears. As she walked past an old mirror, she caught a glimpse of something, a shadow darting behind her. She spun around, but there was nothing there. Panic surged through her, and she stumbled back, knocking over a vase that shattered on the floor. The whispers grew frantic now, swirling around her like a storm. "Help us! Help us!" Desperate for answers, Claire dug into the building's history. She learned that years ago, a family had lived in her apartment, a mother and her 2 children. They had vanished without a trace, and the building had been cursed ever since. Determined to uncover the truth, Claire returned to her apartment one night, armed with a recorder to capture the whispers. As she sat in the dark, the air turned frigid, and the whispers returned, clearer than ever. "Help us, we're trapped." Suddenly the lights flickered, and Claire felt a cold hand brush against her neck. She gasped, her heart racing as she turned to face the darkness. A figure emerged, translucent and ethereal. The mother, her eyes filled with sorrow.
"Please, we need your help,"
the ghostly woman pleaded, her voice echoing in the silence.
"We were taken. We can't rest."
Fear gripped Claire's heart, but compassion surged within her. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice quivering. The ghost pointed toward the mirror, and as Claire approached, she felt a wave of despair wash over her. "You must find our bodies. We're buried beneath this building." Determined to help, Claire contacted the local authorities, and after a thorough investigation, they uncovered the remains of the mother and her children, hidden deep within the foundation of the building. The haunting ceased, and for the first time in years, the apartment felt peaceful. But as Claire moved on, she couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were still watching, waiting for the next soul to wander too close. The whispers faded, but the memory of the mother and her children lingered in the air, a haunting reminder that some spirits never truly find rest.
If you like this type of videos, please subscribe to our channel. We will upload a new horror and mystery story every week.